Hope everybody had a nice evening and morning since we saw you last. We're going to start today's sessions. I'm going to speak for a little bit, just a little bit on general fire behavior and some post-fire conditions. These are going to be super general and not very specific. If I could have dragged you all out on a site visit, it would have been better, but we can't really do that. So we're going to do the next best thing. We're going to talk about it and show you pictures. And then we're going to have a little break about 2:30. Sometime during that break, I would like you to actually go into the chat box and put in what role you've chosen. We talked about this yesterday as far as having a persona, right, for the activity that's going to happen on Friday. So, you know, choose a persona, choose, I don't know, you can choose something completely different than what you are. You can choose a person that's sort of similar to who you are, you know, but you'd want to be maybe a district manager or a conservation planner or a, I don't know, a community member. Choose somebody that's in this world of trying to rehabilitate after fire. And so I want you to do just a little bit of a blurb in the chat box during the break. So we're having kind of, I know Leslie hasn't been here, maybe there's a couple of others. We've been doing fairly substantial breaks partway through the class so that everyone can get up, move around, you know, take breaks, whatever you need to do. But if you could, during that first break, report on what role you've chosen, your persona that you've chosen. And then after that, we'll be hearing from Leslie Michael, who's a soil scientist with WSDA and who was our soil scientist with Okanagan Conservation District during the 2014 and 2015 fires. And she's going to speak on soil conditions after post-fire, treatments and responses. And then she's got a unique perspective. She was actually a producer in some fires that we had here in the area last year. And so she's got that perspective of both sides, and she's going to share some insights from that with us. At 3:30, we'll take another break. I'll ask you to do some more assignments for the activity on Friday during that break. And then we'll have Catherine Rodden, who works with the National Weather Service, and she was very key in a lot of our post-fire water movement kinds of hydrology and such after the fires in 2014, 2015. And she's going to be speaking about that water after fire component. That's a big deal. We'll talk quite a bit about that. And then at 4:30, again, we'll review, have some questions and answers, and then we'll close at 5. So that's sort of our outline for this afternoon. And I will just jump right in because I have a lot to say in a short amount of time, and you'll forgive me if I'm slightly disjointed, but I have had, my husband got quite ill the other day and we ended up in the hospital in the ER. So he just barely came home, and we're still trying to put our lives back together around that. But so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the causes of fire, kind of what happens at different stages and what happens on the ground, and showing you kind of evidence when you go out, because you're not going to be going out during the fires, you're going to be going out after. So you almost have to kind of reconstruct what happened on that site from the existing conditions that you find on the ground. And I wanted to do this a little bit before Leslie and Catherine came in and talked about kind of more detail about that. I'm just going to give you like a brief overview, some general principles, and then you remember I told you that we were going to have each teacher kind of give you the key takeaways that they learned. And so I'm going to give you my key takeaways from working the fires in general, the things that I learned and the things that I felt like were important to remember. So we all know that fire, you need 3 things, right? You need some kind of spark, you need fuel, you need oxygen, right? You need some form of those 3 things in order to have a fire. And so oftentimes when we're talking about these large wildland fires, that means vegetation that dried out. right? Some kind of vegetation that dried out. So we were talking a little bit yesterday after class about how, you know, is it worse if you have like less rain early in the season and then it dries out, like it dries out early? Or if you have more rain early in the season and you have a lot more vegetation and then it dries out later, you know, later in the season, which is worse? And, you know, it's one of those it depends kind of questions, but we definitely want to be watching the vegetation, how lush it is, how much of it there is. If there's some drying heat or wind, the thickness and the density of the fuels. So that's a big one that we'll talk about in a minute when we talk about those more severe fire areas, that the heavier fuels, you know, will burn longer. That's just a thing. If you put a big old log on the fire and you get it going, it's going to last a lot longer than if you throw some hay in there, right? So same principles apply in these large fires. So that's the fuel component. Other pieces of the fuel component are actually structures, fence posts, you know, the human elements that can also be fuels. So then we don't want, but we have, if we have a fire, some kind of heat source, some kind of way that that fire begins. Oftentimes in wildland situations, that's caused by lightning, could be caused by sparking equipment, could be caused, we had one fire here in Okanogan County that was started because someone had a chain dragging underneath their trailer on the highway and it caught some fuel right next to the road. And so during those high, well, you know, you guys have all seen the signs, right, on the highway, high fire danger, right? Anytime that there's those conditions that are easily, that fire can easily begin, any kind of spark from anything. We oftentimes were having to be super careful where we parked so that our mufflers didn't catch grasses on fire and such like that. So there's lots of different ways that a fire can start. And then you need oxygen. And oftentimes when there's a really large fire, if there's not a large wind associated with that fire, oftentimes it can be contained pretty quickly. But if there's wind involved in that equation, that blows, not only blowing it physically away, but it's also giving that fire more oxygen and it'll burn hotter and faster and move it. And oxygen is the looseness of the fuel. So I'm thinking, for example, if you have a lot of stuff packed tight, well, for example, the large log, that's a lot to get started, right? It takes a lot of heat and a lot of fire flame to get that going, to get it burning in the first place. Where grasses are light and fluffy and have a lot of air in between the pieces, that's easier for the fire to get going. So early fire behavior from whatever source, there are things that happen, and these are going to be, if you've ever had a campfire, you're going to understand kind of what I'm talking about, but I just want to go over them because they're going to apply a little bit differently when you're trying to reconstruct what happened on a site. So one of the first things that happens is smoke. Even before flame, you'll get smoke from that fire. Is there someone who has their mic on? Typing? Thank you very much. The smoke is a health hazard, and you definitely want to be protecting yourself from that smoke. And it was amazing when we had these large wildfires. You know, oftentimes in Eastern Washington, we have a lot of smoke from some fire from some other place, and it's uncomfortable. But it was really a problem. We had smoke so thick in some places that you couldn't see across the road. You couldn't see a couple houses down. It really decreased your visibility, though that is a safety hazard. The particulates that you're breathing, that's a problem. Another principle with that early fire behavior is that heat rises, right? We all know that heat rises. One thing that impacts that plant material on the ground is that heat is rising from the fire up, right? So oftentimes on the ground, we would, and I'll show you some photos. Maybe I'll show you the photos that will help me explain this a little bit. Oh, was it going to give me heck? Maybe not. You guys can see that? Come on. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. I don't know why that's not popping up better. Dang it. Come on. Okay, sorry about this. I should have run through this with our tech rehearsal the other day, but you can kind of see in this small photo, if you look, there you go. Just needed a minute to take. Okay, so you can see in this picture, this is some rangeland that was burned through pretty quickly. And so there was tall bunch grasses out here. There are some hillsides with some slope. That quick burn fire runs through, and everyone will look at that and say, oh my gosh, because it's moving quickly and it's spreading quickly. Everyone will be very alarmed about that, right? And if it's coming towards your house, you have really good reason to be alarmed about that. But if it's in this rangeland, it's actually, the heat is kind of skipping along the surface of the soil, and the roots are not really being impacted terrifically much. And those plants have actually evolved in sync with those fires over thousands and millions of years, right? So they actually are very good. They have very deep roots. They recover quite quickly after fire. I'll show you some pictures in a minute about that. But just keep in mind that heat is going to rise. And so the hot part of the fire, unless there's some other factors, is going to go up into that grass layer and burn the tops of things and not down into the ground. And we'll talk in a minute about the times when that doesn't happen. But it tends to go up, okay? It tends to run quickly through lighter fuels. It doesn't generate quite as much heat as some other factors we're going to talk about in a minute, okay? And fire tends to run uphill, right? Because the heat is rising, it's going to tend to go up a hill and away from bottomlands where usually the riparian areas are. So oftentimes if there's one of these kind of light quick fires, they don't really burn into riparian areas because those areas have very lush green vegetation that's not as susceptible to being burned. So as that fire gets bigger and starts burning bigger material, then other things start to happen. That heat rises up, but it's also pulling other air in from around and pushing it up. Does that make sense? So it's actually creating this air movement that's more than the air movement that would normally be happening, okay? That can actually move up into the atmosphere, carry ash, cinders, things way up into the air, and those air currents up high can actually drop those in other places. So be very aware of that, because that was something that actually spread the Carlton Complex fire quite quickly, was that we had this wind, besides the wind that was on the ground, but also wind that was being created by the fire itself, that was lifting all that stuff up high and taking burning cinders into new areas and making those light up in other places. The small fires tend to like grow outward like an amoeba and kind of coalesce together. Carlton Complex, we had, the first was 4 little fires, and then the wind came up and started blowing those up, and they got bigger and bigger. Pretty soon it was a big fire. Pretty soon it was going in directions and places where we didn't ever really expect it to. And then as you move out of that kind of rangeland area, you're moving more into heavy timber, tree land, forest land, or down into the riparian areas, which we also saw in Carlton, which was kind of unusual. Those fires in the heavier fuel areas will burn for longer. That bigger log is starting to burn and stay there for a while. And those logs, those trees will fall and burn on the ground. And that's burning for quite a while. And that's when you start to see the heat kind of move down through the soil into the roots of plants, into the roots of shrubs, into the deeper layers of the soil, and you'll have a longer recovery time, even with the grasses and such, during that kind of burn. Once that really gets going, that fire is super active. It's getting bigger and bigger. The wind is blowing at places. The created winds can actually start pushing the fire into areas where it wouldn't normally go, like those riparian areas or downhill. Or we saw some interesting behavior. We had landowners tell us that the fire would come up to the door and then back off and then come around from a different direction and move in towards the house from a different direction. So you got to kind of be, my advice to planners is really listen to what the landowners are saying, because oftentimes they were there when this fire was happening. But you can actually kind of also reconstruct a little bit of what was going on by looking at the land itself and seeing what was happening to the vegetation, to the, where the fire moved to. You can kind of see what's going on with that. In those heavy fuel areas, that will burn for a long time. It will those big logs, those big trees will continue to burn. Sometimes it will burn completely down into the ground and burn underground, the roots. And I'll show you some pictures of that. Hold on just a second. Well, first I want to show you some heavily burned range. This is a heavy sagebrush area. So these standing sticks were where there was a lot of sagebrush. Sagebrush is not something that usually comes back very quickly. Usually takes about 10 years for sage to become reestablished in these areas that were heavily sagebrush before. And you can see heavier layer of ash on the ground.
Terry, can you make the picture larger?
That's about as big as I can go. Will that work?
Well, I think the screen I'm seeing, maybe it's only it's showing your picture gallery and maybe not the photo itself. Maybe it's just me.
And
I'm seeing the same thing.
Okay, darn it. Why is it not doing it? Give me just a second.
You might be sharing this particular window, but then when you double click on the photo, it pops up in a new window, and so it's not sharing that.
I wonder how I can make it do that. I'm wondering if with permissions and such.
Well, no, if it has to do with when you selected share, so you might need to stop sharing your screen and while leaving that the photo up, and then say share again, and then pick that one.
That makes sense. Okay, let me see if I can do that, because I do want you guys to see what's going on with that. Are you back to me?
Yes, back to you.
Okay. Oh, but I didn't open it, so that's not going to help me. Hold on, we're getting there. Okay, I have to do things in a certain order. This is what I should have been doing during the tech training. There we go. Is that better?
Yes.
Yes, great, thanks.
Okay. So that'll be awkward, but we'll work our way through it. I might take a little bit of our time during the break to show photos. But yeah, so this is more heavily burned. You can see the layer of ash. That's much heavier than in that other picture where there was actually standing dead grass still in the field. There's no grass here. This is just empty. And this is when the landowners will say to you, it's a moonscape out there. There isn't anything left. Okay. And they'll be pretty stressed out about that. Oftentimes the landowners do not understand that these plants evolved in conjunction with fire for many years. And so they don't understand that those plants are actually adapted to fire and they will return. So you can see that this is part of that psychological trauma that happens is they look out and everything that they used to see is gone. and they can see the rocks far away, right? That they couldn't even see before because there was stuff in the way. And it impacts their psychology very deeply, and they will feel that loss keenly. And if you can help them understand, and I'll show you some more pictures in a minute, because this is immediately after the fire. This is not a ways down the road, okay? This is pretty quickly after the fire. I'll show you some pictures in a minute of something about a month later. And that is, you know, you start seeing little green things come up. I was trying to find pictures that were really alarming to show you, but, and I had trouble with that because actually most of our site visits, like we say, it takes a little time to get things set up. It takes a little time for us to get connected with those landowners and figure out, you know, where they are and get teams out to them after they've kind of dealt with their initial shock and losses from structure fires and things like that. By the time we got out there, it didn't look like this anymore, oftentimes. But this is a heavily burned area on rangeland. So let me, I want to talk for just a minute before I show you some more, are you guys seeing me now? Okay. I want to talk for just a minute about some bigger picture kinds of ideas about this. Leslie and Catherine are going to talk more about, you know, the details of stuff, and Bobby did a good job of that yesterday. But I kind of want to take that 30,000 foot view for a minute. These kinds of large disasters, they occur at scales that we really have a hard time with because we're not used to thinking about things that large. We as planners almost have an advantage that way because we're used to looking at the landscape on this large scale. We're used to looking at a large area of, you know, of contiguous kind of ecosystem, or we're used to looking at from here to the 40 acres across the way, right? But most people are not, they're not used to thinking that way. And so they try to control things on that, you know, my scale, my human scale kind of level. And that's not an effective, it's not effective for them to be thinking about the on the ground work that large. Does that make sense? If they have 40 acres and they're thinking about the fence posts at the other end of that 40 acres, or they're thinking about the entire 40 acres and seeding the whole thing, that's not the scale that's effective for work in disaster recovery, at least on the level of conservation district planning level, okay? Help them take care of their human problems. Help them get them hooked up if they haven't talked with somebody yet about their home and their structure fire, if they haven't talked to their insurance company about replacing their goods in their house, if they haven't talked to those people yet, hook them up with those people, okay? It's not our business and it's not our job to do that, but we can certainly hook them up with the resources in the community, especially if we've developed those relationships ahead of time. Nature generally recovers. Human beings like things to happen quickly, and sometimes that won't happen in this situation, right? The scale is very large and very expensive to treat for things on that huge scale. We actually did a lot of calculations after the Carlton fires and the following year on how much it would actually cost for us to put forest trees in some of these areas, right? To plant trees in these areas. And the numbers were staggeringly huge, okay? They were not something that anybody is going to pay for. They're not at that, it's just too big, okay? And nature's really good at doing things for itself. And oftentimes when we interfere, that can actually sometimes stall out the natural response. So what we're really talking about when we're talking about fire recovery on the level of the conservation district is things that are of a human scale and the ways that humans interact with that natural world. Way more than the natural world itself, okay? It's taking care of itself. It's healing itself. It's trying to do the things it normally does after fire. What we're trying to help is people cope. with the fact that their human infrastructure is gone, right? So we're talking about fence posts, we're talking about irrigation systems, we're talking about, what else did we do? We did do we're talking about protecting structures from flooding. We're talking about how those human pieces interact with that natural world, right? And that's what we're really working on. So let me show you a couple more pictures. Sorry about how clunky this is. Let me do that first. Hold on just a second. Okay, so this is an area of forest land that was not so heavily burned. And you can see that there are some burned tree trunks. The leaves are pretty brown. There's quite a bit of litter still on the ground. So this is not a heavy burn in a forested area. Okay, this is more of a lighter burn. There was fire here, and some of these, especially deciduous trees, may be impacted pretty heavily. The conifer trees will be impacted quite a bit, except for ponderosa pine, which has quite a heavy trunk, bark on the trunk, and so that one is going to be a little bit better as far as survival rates in the long term after fire. But these deciduous trees, it burns through. Oftentimes they don't burn that much because they're full of water, and so they're not going to burn as quickly or as much as some other things. Let me show you the next one. Boy, this is clunky. I apologize for this. Okay, so this is something that I would call like a medium damage in a forested area. There's still a lot of standing timber. There's some ash on the ground, but it's not horribly deep. This picture was actually taken about a month after the fire happened, and we had some rain after that fire, and so we're starting to see a little bit of ground vegetation coming back. These trees will not come back, right? They are pretty much gone. Those are pretty dead trees. Sorry, I'm gonna do it in the right order here. And this is what I would call a more heavily burned area. So you might see holes where the trees used to be. I also want to point out slopes, because a lot of times these forested areas will be on a heavy slope. The tops of those, all that heat is rising up, right? So the tops of the hills tend to get burned quite heavily, especially in these heavily forested areas. There's usually less thinning going on up there. There's usually less space between the trees. The limbs are hanging down and connecting to each other, and so that fire's moving through, but it's burning there for a long time, and it's actually creating this quite heavy ash layer. You need to be careful as a planner when you're walking through an area like this, that you're watching where you put your feet, because you may fall into a hole. Bobby was talking the other day about driving through gullies that were created, or potholes that were created by the roots burning out from underneath the road. But you really want to be careful between the holes that you could step in, the still burning roots that you could be putting your foot down into, and a wind coming up and dropping things on your head. This is actually one of the trickiest places to go and do a site visit on, because it's just a little bit more dangerous than the rest. I wanted to show you a little bit of contrast between areas that could be right next to each other. So oftentimes we'll think that the fire Oh, where'd it go? The fire is has completely burned everything, and very frequently that's not the case. Oftentimes there will be a part of a area that where fire kind of came through in fingers, and it'll be heavily burned right next to something that wasn't burned hardly at all. Oops, hold on. There we go. So in this case, the hillside behind was heavily burned, and this hillside in front was not burned at all, and this field down here wasn't burned at all. So you can get that kind of patchwork look through those things. It really helps. I'm going to make a plug for GIS, and I know that a lot of planners are relying on their GIS people to do the GIS for them. I found it very, very, very helpful to know some GIS myself, and I was by no means an expert, but just having those maps handy and having people who knew how to create them, and then I could look at them and pull the layers on and off was just astoundingly helpful. So use your tools when you're doing this firework. I'm going to go a little bit into my break time. I apologize for that. It's just the photos are too clunky. Oh, sorry. Sorry, guys, I did it again. Okay. So I talked a little bit about the riparian damage with the fire coming down into the riparian area and burning that out. This is an example of that. The water is right there. And usually this would be just thick with heavily, it would be really thick with heavy, I can't. Very thick with heavy vegetation and lots of water and lots of water-bearing plants. But again, this was a month after the fire, so you can see the little green sprouts coming up of all the trees down in that riparian area. And one of the things that was most important in these riparian areas was there was water there. And so what would come back was oftentimes the aspen or the, you know, some of the riparian shrubs would come back kind of from the roots, but this open space of bare soil was just a breeding ground for weeds. So we did a lot of treatment of weeds in those riparian areas. Sorry, guys. I am not having luck with tech today. I think I'm gonna save a couple of my other photos for. I'm sure that Catherine is going to kind of cover what I was going to cover about those particular photos, but I did want to show you a couple. I want to make a point, a key takeaway about slope. We talked a little bit about fires going up slopes and fires alternately and rarely coming down slopes, but I would propose that slope is one of the biggest key factors in any kind of recovery work. You want to be thinking about slope. You want to be noticing slope. Before you go out on your site visits, you want to be doing topo maps. You want to be getting a sense of where the high areas are, where the low areas are. This, you can see, this is a burned area. If water hits this slope, it's going to run down. And there is nothing now to prevent that water drop from dislodging soil, from moving it to someplace else, to flooding downhill. It's not going to soak in. That water's not going to soak in very much. It's not going to do its normal behavior. We're going to talk about that quite a bit in a minute with Catherine and with Leslie. But please, when you're out, be paying close attention to slope, because it's not just the fire behavior, it's not just the way the water moves, but it's also when you go to do any kind of restoration work or anything like that, if you put seed on that slope, it's going to roll down the slope, right? If you put seed on that slope and water hits it, it's going to wash all the seed down the bottom of the slope. So slope is just a seriously key factor in all of those recovery activities. And I'll show you one more photo really quick, because I want to show you, I know that we've been talking a lot about landowners and how the fire is impacting them and the trauma that they're experiencing through this. And I went up and took this photo about 4 years after the 2014 fire. And this was in an area of that fire that was super heavily burned, okay? This was deep ash 4 years before. And you can see that this is coming back, that there are trees that actually survived. I am just astonished, because I went up there and I looked at this place and I thought there is not going to be a tree for 100 miles. And yet 4 years later, nature is healing the wounds. It's definitely damaged. It's definitely still got standing dead trees. It's definitely still got stuff going on. But nature really knows how to take care of itself if we don't get in the way. And so I would propose that that again, those things that we need to be focused on as planners are those human infrastructure pieces. And if we can take care of those and help folks with those, and give them guidance to help them understand how nature is responding, help them to be observant, help them to see what's going on their own property, help them not to get in the way with human interventions too much. That to me was a huge takeaway from those fires. And I appreciate your time. I thank you for being patient with my crazy tech system here. We're going to take a short break. We're going to have to keep it quite short. So maybe it's now 2:38. Let's go to 2:43. How about that? I'll give you 5 minutes. Get up, walk around, get some blood moving. Please, if you're going to participate on Friday, please put down in the chat box your role if you haven't done that already. If you want to take the full 5 minutes, come back and put that comment in the chat box when you get back. Okay? 5 minutes off.
Hey, Terry.
Yeah.
I noticed that the meeting chat, at least for me, says that it's muted. And I don't know if that's settings for everyone or, oh, maybe I'm fairly new to Teams, so maybe it's just.
Oh, yeah. Guy got on there. He said he was going to be a wizard, chaotic, good elf. So he's a Dungeons and Dragons player. Woohoo!
Oh, so he's in. Nice.
So I don't know why you're not able to. That might be a Craig Nelson question, because he's much more familiar with Teams than I am.
And it could be on my end. We just got Teams here the last few weeks, and I'm still a monkey over here pushing buttons. So
I am facile enough with tech to get myself in big trouble. So
Yeah.
Well, Terry, I have to sadly say I've never played Dungeons and Dragons, and I don't know nothing about that realm. So, are we just in the, you know, whatever you, because the kind of the roles you went over as office staff planner, just put whatever one we chose.
whatever one you chose. Yep. Whatever one you chose.
All right, thank you.
There's going to be enough play in this game that Guy's answer actually works, but the other as well. So we're good.
All right, thank you, Terry.
I'm really looking forward to this game, you guys.
I don't know much about D&D other than the dice, and then people sitting around painting their little figurines with swords. So maybe that's what I'll focus on. My figurines and my special powers.
There you go, your figurines and your special powers. And it's the special powers and the tools. Like oftentimes in D&D, you're like, you know, you've got a sword, you've got a rope, you've got a something with you. Those are going to be key. So.
Got GIS. I've got.
Yes.
Okay. I see where we're going.
It's gonna make sense, I promise. I didn't explain it very well yesterday, so it is gonna make more sense later. I
Well,
hope.
I like it.
wrap my head around it. For a few days, it'll be helpful. I'm
Yeah.
gonna come with my special toolkit.
I do like your comment around GIS, Terry. I am one that uses GIS quite often. Unfortunately, I don't have anybody in my office who can do all my GIS work, or they would have it because I despise GIS. But it is so pinnacle in showing things to landowners, because I use the HIZ zones, so I'm showing where their zones are, and map communities who have that connectivity and everything like that. So it was nice to hear you point out that.
Yeah.
One thing that I hate so much.
We're gonna talk more about it, and you can use somebody else. I mean, if you've got someone else in your office who's just like your GIS person, you can. But it's hard to actually make maps that include the information that you want if you're not familiar with how it works. I mean, you know, you don't know what you could put on a map if you're not familiar enough with GIS to even tell somebody else what to put on it, right? So I've been missing it terribly since I left the conservation district because I had it there. I don't have it anymore. Great.
Terry, can you see my presentation?
I to go. It seems weird now.
It is appearing.
It's no, it's not up.
It's not up.
Oh, wait. You have it open. You have it as a selected item. I think what I'm seeing is your screen. Yeah. So go back to open share tray. There you go.
So now it's showing up.
Yeah, you got it. You got it. Beautiful.
Now I can't see you guys.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
I was hoping to see you guys and my screen.
yeah.
And that doesn't seem to be working.
So everybody except Leslie and I, please turn your microphones off. Thank you.
Okay. And now is it showing up?
Yep. Looks
Okay.
great.
I have 3 screens going, so if I'm looking around, you'll just bear with me. So I'm Leslie Michael. I'm with the Washington State Department of Agriculture. I worked for the Okanagan Conservation District for 7-8 years before I transitioned over to the Washington State Department of Agriculture. I'm a soil scientist. as per usual, anyone who's worked with me knows that I don't follow directions well. So when I was given this assignment to talk about post-fire soils, I've kind of taken that and run with it kind of in my own way. And so I am going to talk about post-fire soils, but I'm also going to talk about some other stuff throughout this process. So some of my experience, I first got involved with assessing post-fire soils in 2014 after the Carlton complex. We worked with the Forest Service and brought in a Forest Service team to assess private lands, private and state lands, because they made up 2/3 of the Carlton complex, which was over 250,000 acres that burned. It was the largest fire in Washington state history at that point in time, which was then exceeded in the Okanagan complex. And we didn't have the Forest Service help in 2015, so we pulled it together and we just ran with our teams then. We also ran the Carpenter Road fire, a bear assessment for that. I did a little bit of assist on the Yale fire in 2020. Catherine and BLM team came in and they did a bear assessment on the Palmer Lake fire. And so I was called in to come and help with that private landowner interaction on that. And then in 2020, we had the Pearl Hill fire and the Cold Springs fire, which was huge acreage. But Joe Lang and I, who you'll hear from, we did kind of an initial assessment to see if the Pearl Hill fire needed a bear assessment, but we didn't end up running one. Some of my own personal history and why I'm pretty passionate about some of this is in 2018, many of you heard about the Paradise Fire. My sister is from her and her in-laws, and so I was pretty involved with that, went down, helped out with cleanup and stuff that went on there. And then with the Pearl Hill fire, when that I live with my guy Dan. He's a rancher here in Douglas County. So when that fire jumped the river, it jumped onto his property. We were the first ones to identify that it actually jumped the river. And so that was, we spent all of September dealing with the Pearl Hill fire. So like I said, I have, not just some of the very soils oriented perspective that I've gained over the last 7 years, but in 2020, I was able to see what it's like to be on the producer end of this. The Pearl Hill, the Cold Springs and Pearl Hill fire really impacted producers in a way that I think was above and beyond some of the scope that's happened in the past. A lot of the ranchers lost 100% of the range of their range, and aren't going to be able to go back for 3 years. We lost, I'd say, 95% of our range, and so it's a really long process to kind of figure out and deal with that. So some of the things I wanted to share with you kind of from that producer perspective and dealing with producers when you're going out, and this is maybe definitely from a large scale producers. I know as conservation districts and resource managers, you're dealing with everyone from just homeowners or people who have small scale stuff to some of these larger scale producers, but definitely working with someone with ranchers and being on that side of it. That's certainly the perspective I have. A lot of these guys that were impacted, I've worked with since 2014, 2015, and then have gotten to know them better as personal friends. So one thing I'd like to point out is a lot of these guys have been involved in local fire districts. And that's really important to me, is because they were out there fighting from the beginning. So when you're going out and talking to them, they may or may not have been home. They may or may not have been able to take care of their own needs. We've had a couple of burnover victims, which involved both Douglas County and Okanogan County districts. We've had some deaths that have occurred. And so when you have a large wildfire that goes through, that really has a big human impact. One example, this year we had some deaths, and that household happened to be right across the river from where we fed cows right after the fire. And we were out there feeding and honking our horn, trying to get the cows to come in, and the family was probably down on the river and could hear us. So when you're dealing with not just fire effects, you're dealing with some of those human impacts, and struggling through that just makes some of these fire related things that much more difficult. So just one more thing to keep in mind as you're dealing with this, especially those ranchers who are on fire districts. They do it because they know they have to be involved. It's how they protect their area. The other thing is that livestock are the most important aspect. Like, I think if you ask any of these ranchers whether or not they would rather have lost their house or their livestock, I mean, anyone will tell you that, like, they don't care about their house. Like, you know, when they're going out spending weeks looking for livestock, having to shoot their cows, bring them back, it takes weeks. We were lucky we didn't lose any. We were probably stupid enough to be going out and looking for cows without guns. but we were more fortunate than most of our neighbors. And so it just, you know, everybody's helping out everybody. We certainly helped out our neighbors with livestock, moving livestock, all of that. The other is that there are a lot of decisions that these guys have to make. And any way, as resource managers, that you can help limit how many decisions they have to make when you're helping them getting information, the better. And so that's a really big thing, because it's 1,000 questions and decisions coming in every day. Not a lot of sleep. You know, this is their livelihood, and it's it impacts them not just that month, that day. It's going to be 3 years, 5 years that this is really going to impact them. And then insurance only covers a cost, even if NRCS and FSA comes in. A cow that's lost might have a value, if it goes to market, of $1,200. Any cattle rancher will tell you that they've put a lot more money, $1,200, put a lot more money into a cow than that. I think FSA's payment on that was around $600. So it's only a fraction of what comes in. So on that note, just some practical stuff that came through for us that I want you guys to keep in mind that we found really, really useful. One, I have this picture of a fence roller. Somebody donated this, one of these fence rollers, to one of the local ranchers, and all the local ranchers have been sharing it. We have, between the two fires in 2020, hundreds of miles of fence. And so this fence roller, guys are just using it, sharing it. It takes 4 strand of wire and rolls it up in, they can do a mile in pretty short order. So it's made a really big difference in cleaning stuff up.
Leslie, are you showing a picture of that fence roller?
Yeah, this Dakota.
It's
I put links in. So there's in the whatever the sharing thing is, I put some links in there
Okay.
of this one in particular. I also, the other links I put in, one is a story that was written about the bear fire in California. Producer wrote of his experience going out and looking for his livestock. He lost 400 head. We had a producer here in Okanagan that lost, I'd say, pretty close to that. So the fence roller, I think, is a really good long kind of immediate need, and sort of in those first couple of months is a good thing to have around. Another one that's kind of immediate as people are getting rolling is a post pounder. A lot of these guys have to put up fence pretty immediate. Both of these are attachment for like a little bobcat or something like that. Another thing that we found really useful, some ranchers use these right away or already use them, but a vaccine gun. And this is just a gun you put your vaccines in, you go out and you shoot your cows, and it's super useful. In a case like this, a lot of ranchers have either lost their setup or they don't have it, they can't bring their cows in, they don't have any place to take them. If they have to administer anything, the vaccine gun was really nice. We had about a pink eye that we were trying to deal with. So we were able to borrow one of these vaccine guns. And,
hey, Leslie,
yeah,
your slides they're not moving forward. We're still on the post fireworks slide that shows you with Eric, I think it is.
and I'm only seeing your initials.
you're only seeing my initials. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You just have to listen to me then.
We're good with that. We're actually good with that. But you're talking about all these cool things and we're not seeing them.
Is that better?
That's better.
Yeah, now I can see a fence rolling. Oh, now we're on Fire 2020.
There we go.
Yeah. There we go.
So the vaccine guns were super useful to us. And then I would say that the people who showed up with no questions asked, we had Old Mill out of Ellensburg. They brought in mineral. We had World Vets come in. They provided services to us. Another thing I would say, fencing supplies were donated, but often the producers couldn't use them because they were cheaper supplies. So I think they worked for small landowners or people with sheep or goats or something like that. But really talking to your producers about what they use or what they need, like the barbed wire that was donated wasn't strong enough. These guys don't like to accept help. It's a sense of pride, and that was it was really tough. They need the help more than anyone, and yet they don't want to accept any help. And so I think that the people who were able to just show up and drop stuff off, knowing what they needed, was really, really helpful. Some of the people who were the most helpful were the past ranchers. So in Okanagan, Vic Stokes and the Olma brothers, certainly helped out with the guys there in Okanagan. They're all connected. And so they knew exactly what these guys needed. And I could certainly in the future see a network of producers who have experienced loss through wildfires showing up and helping out, building fence, because they know exactly what it means and what it means to go through all of this. And then I was really amazed, like these guys who were all impacted, they were all on the phone with each other all the time, sometimes 3 times a day, sometimes for an hour, 45 minutes. It was mind-boggling to me. But figuring out as conservation districts and resource managers how to utilize those contacts, I think is really good, because if something happens, they know about it. I've always said that farmers are the worst gossips, and it's true. I'll continue to say that, but definitely figuring out how to let that work for you. So my recommendations with that is simplifying the process. Like I said, these guys have so many decisions to make. I think the Okanagan Conservation District did a really great job and has a lot of knowledge, but simplifying that process so that way they didn't have to go through and talk to a lot of different people. It's a one-stop shop, and that really makes a difference. And then figure out what that required information is. I'll be honest, it's really hard 2 days after the fire to know how many miles of fencing you've lost, especially when you're talking about 100 miles of fence. There's no way to get out there and map it. I don't know it's required by FSA, but like priorities. And when you're worried about whether or not your cows are alive or dead, yeah, it's just, it's a challenge. So really narrowing it down and figuring out what is that required information, what do you need right away, and then really figuring out, prioritizing what are some of these short-term things that we can get out to producers now versus long-term. And like I said, this is a 3-year process. We put our ground into deferment for 3 years. I think everyone in Okanagan, they're on tribal land, and I think that's standard. So I think people tend to forget about this after 6 months, but these guys are going to be hurting for the next 3 years. Lease contracts around here are $10 to $15 per AUM. Where everyone I've heard from, they're paying $20 to $30 plus transport to take their livestock elsewhere. So those are just some numbers that are going into that. They have to keep their herds up, but a long-term feed source, finding those connections, those other people who have grazing lands, that's a really big thing. And then another thing, we're working with the Okanagan Long-Term Recovery Group. I think with some of the cleanup on this, because I think it's something that's really tangible. It's a long-term thing, but some of those outbuildings that burn, some of these old houses, those still remain. They're burned. They have a ton of nails out there. When you're talking about livestock, now they're walking through there, a lot more potential to get hurt. Someone just told me they lost a cow to tetanus. You know, and then we're pulling out miles and miles of fence. It would be great to figure out a way to do something with the wire. I know that there's recycling in Spokane, but even, you know, otherwise the stuff goes in these guys' dump. And by these guys' dump, it's somewhere out in the back 40, I'll be honest. And so just figuring out how to deal with some of this cleanup, which I think, you know, is some of these long-term achievable goals that can be really be done by conservation agencies. So that's some of my producer stuff. I don't remember what time I'm supposed to talk to you, so now I'll jump into soils. So Craig, you just start cutting me off when I go too long, okay? So during a fire, a couple things happen. The fire goes through, and so we have that material that's burning, all the organic matter. A lot of that burns off we have conductive heat and radiant heat. And so all those organic compounds, most of them will volatilize and move into the atmosphere, but some of them will combust, but some of them will move down into the soil and they'll create this water repellent layer. And so the hotter the fire is, the more likely this is to happen, and the deeper that will push that layer into the soil, and it creates a waxy resin into the soil, which becomes hydrophobic. So when we're talking about management after the fire, this becomes problematic because, as Catherine will talk about, when we get rain events, if that soil becomes hydrophobic and water repelling, it's more likely to run. And so we don't want that to happen, or when that happens, we're more likely to have soil loss, either due to wind erosion or to water erosion, which becomes really problematic, and what Catherine will probably spend most of her time talking about. So if you're going out and you're doing site visits, some of the things to keep in mind as you go out there, and Terry showed some really great pictures, but is there ground cover? You know, do you have something covering the ground? Are there pine needles, leaves, grass? Because if there are, that means the soil didn't burn quite as much, right? We can spend a lot of time going over the very specifics of what someone like myself would do when they go out and do a post-fire soil burn severity. There's books out there, you can read it, you can call in a specialist like myself, but there's also just some basic principles that you might look at. But is vegetation returning? Is it likely to return? How badly is that burned is that vegetation? So in this picture, and again, Terry showed some great pictures, you can see that the grass is already starting to come back. These sagebrush that were here, I would call these moderately burned. They still have their branches on them. And when I say stobs, that would mean only like, you know, 5 to 8 inches of that stub is still there. You know, so that starts getting higher intensity. Or are the roots totally burned out? And so when the roots are totally burned out, you might see the soil even turn color. You'll probably see a lot of ash, and then you might even see that soil turn orange. And that starts to be a challenge, right? We know the soil burned really hot. We know recovery is going to be longer if it looks like that. And so in this case, we see that the trees still have litter on them. They're going to drop their needles. They're going to provide some ground cover. The grasses are starting to come back. So this is probably going to be a place where, yeah, it looks pretty bad, but we're going to say, yeah, this will probably come back in a couple of years. The trees are going to take a little longer because they're almost completely scorched. We're not going to have a lot of regeneration of those trees, or that's probably not the right word. But this soil here, I might stop and dig if I wanted to look at a point, but I probably wouldn't spend too much time here. So when we're looking at soil burn severity, how badly that soil burned itself, we're looking at ground cover. What's the amount and condition of the ground cover? What's the ash color? Is there any ash there? How deep is it? Sometimes we'd walk through someplace and it'd be really deep. Is there any soil structure left? If we dig down a couple inches, is that soil structure still look like soil, or is it completely gone and we're just looking at a lot of ash? And then the roots, anyone who's played around in their garden, you can tell the roots are still soft. You can play with them, or have they dried out? Has that fire gotten so hot that those roots have become brittle? And then water repellency. We'll actually scrape off a little bit of the soil and we'll drop water on it to see if it's repellent. So, and this is something we'll do when we do a burn, a bear assessment, and if you're going out and you're talking to a landowner, you may want to do something like this. You may just want to look around and do a visual assessment. And here you can look, I put the field guide for mapping soil burn severity as a link in the document that I uploaded to the drive for you. And so this form or table is in there. So you can read through it, and it gives you some really specific ways to sort of look at it. Like, what do the trees look like? And that'll help you to determine whether or not it's low, moderate, high. And those can help you talk to producers or landowners about how they might determine how to manage their land. If it's low, you might just say, let's wait. If it's moderate, it might be a longer wait. And if it's high, you might want to decide to come in and maybe plant some trees or do some logging, or, it's just going to be that conversation with the landowner on what their capacity is to manage some of this. We don't expect everyone to be a soil scientist out in the field. And so this field guide for mapping soil burn severity gives you a lot of information on how to look at soils and assess it. But at the end of the day, you're working with a landowner, you're working with what they're comfortable with, having that conversation on what their capacity is, how they want to handle it. And so it's building that relationship. Here's a couple more pictures. Again, on the right side, you have a situation where it burned pretty hot. So your recommendation for someone in this situation is going to be very, very different on how they want to handle it, because it's going to take more time to come back. You know, for these trees to come back, you're looking at a 30-year turnaround for it to come back and look the way it did. Burned hot, there's deep ash, versus the one on the left where you can see a sagebrush here, stobs remain. So this is a good example of stobs remain. But you have areas where grass is coming back. A lot of these trees are still doing well. You know, this is a place that someone's going to be able to leave the landscape as it is. And it's really encouraging. And then, you know, the landowner in the background is going to have a very different story. You're going to have a different conversation with them than you would with someone in the foreground. My number one recommendation to a producer is going to be wait and see. I think it's the most challenging, driving around, seeing your land, seeing what you love. It's demoralizing. And it's the hardest emotion to try and manage as you talk about natural resources with someone. I think people want action, and you have to balance what is reasonable and their willingness to sort of wait and see with their desire to do something that's actionable. I think at the Conservation District, we've had people come in and get 200 trees and want to plant them. But you also have to have a discussion with them about, can they take care of those trees for the next year and help them get established, or are 20 trees this year and 20 trees the next year more reasonable as they deal with rebuilding their house? You know, if reseeding some of the worst areas makes them feel better, sometimes that's a good option. And it might not necessarily be the right choice, but some people want action, and you have to understand that as a natural resource manager, and being able to provide information for people and the best recommendation, while still understanding that this is a heart-wrenching process to go through, and people can't sit still because they feel powerless. Sometimes doing lop and scatter as they clean up, or chipping if they're able to do some of that. Controlling weeds, it's a really great opportunity for people to get some of those patches of weeds under control. And anytime they can keep the soil covered, it's going to reduce erosion. I sent Craig a picture of this sandstorm I drove through after the 2020 fire. I could hardly see driving down the road. It was pretty bad. So Bear Team, I think everybody wants to know about Bear Team. So a Bear Team is, and Catherine's probably going to correct me on all of this, so she can provide as much update. There's two different things, intensity and severity. So intensity is how much of the canopy has burned, which is really easy to identify. And severity is how badly the soil burned. And so a Bear Team is going out there and they're taking the intensity map, which is done by satellite, and they're matching it up with the severity of the soil. And we do that so that way we know how much of that soil is at high risk to erosion. And then we figure out where all those values at risk are. And those values at risk are homes and roads, their cultural resources, fish and wildlife, habitat, and all sorts of things. And then we prioritize areas where we might need to treat. So high slopes that drain into someone's home, for instance. And we say this is an area that we need to protect because someone's home or these critical access roads are at stake, or there's critical fish habitat here. And so that's essentially what a bear team does. We try and do it as quick as possible after a fire because those rain events can come pretty fast and furious, as we learned after the 2014 fire. And my bear team slide apparently, oh, here we go. Let's do this. So when do you need a bear team? So federal teams, Forest Service, BLM, they often run bear teams. And so depending on the acreage, Forest Service, I believe, runs bear teams on anything over 500 acres. And often if their fire is large enough and there is some private land, their assessment will be good enough to cover the private lands. In the case of the Carlton complex, where 2/3 of that area was state and private lands, we didn't believe that their assessment would cover all the unique area, especially because it was so large. And so that's why there was the need for a separate one. Same with the Okanagan complex. It's a very large fire. A lot of that was state and private lands. So in that case, there was really large acreage. A lot of that was state and private lands. And then assuming those are in place, there being a lot of high severity, high intensity burn in a place with lots of values at risk. So we're talking steep slopes with critical infrastructure at the bottom of that. This picture, I believe, is from the 2014, and that's a case where that home is next to a creek and that, you know, right after the fire that flooded. So I'm about to wrap up here. Lessons learned, I guess, in all of this work. One, take care of yourself and your staff. Make sure that, I think all of us at the Okanagan Conservation District, we worked really hard. I think, I don't know about Catherine's bear hours, but I put in 112 hours in 8 days on the Okanagan complex. I think doing the post-fire work, there tends to have a really big emergent need to be at work, take care of that. There's a lot of emotions. You're dealing with something that's really, really heavy. I don't think that as humans, we're always the best at regulating that. And I think it's important that not only as staff, but also as managers, that everybody takes care of everybody and make sure that people are getting the time off they need to recuperate from a situation that can be really intense. I would encourage you to not reinvent the wheel with some of this. Okanagan Conservation District and many others have created forms and guidance and stuff that has really paved the way for so much fire recovery work. But I would also encourage you to think outside the box. I think there's a lot of work to be done and new ways to think about how we do fire recovery. And so we're just getting started, and I think we're really paving the way for how we do this. And then thinking long term, funding is going to take a while. We know that. We have a big fire. We're probably not going to get funding until the next legislative session. You know, and some of this, even seeding, you know, if it doesn't happen right away, it might not be useful. So some of those longer term ideas that really can come back and help producers get their feet under them are going to be the most useful. And so just be thinking about that long-term impact. How do you really help these producers recover after they've gone through that first 6 months or a year to get their feet back under them? So that's it.
That's terrific, Leslie. Thank you so much. That was fantastic. The point about staff, I actually feel like there's a lot of potential for staff within an organization to help support each other in those. And I feel like actually with Okanagan Conservation District, we had a company culture at the beginning of that fire that was quite supportive and helpful to the staff anyway. And the Conservation Commission and other organizations that we were developing those relationships with also were helping support each other. And that was a huge deal, just that amount of we all kind of watched each other's backs. And when something would happen and we'd realize that somebody was kind of in trouble, we would help them. And that's really what that piece is about. And I feel like it's that way with producers as well. I know that the Cattlemen's Association did huge amounts of work after many of these fires, helping their members, helping other people that were cattlemen within those situations, helping and supporting. And I know that there were a lot of people from other areas of the country that were coming and helping as well. So love it, Leslie. Excellent presentation. Thank you so much. We're going to take a short break.
Okay. Well, I was going to ask if there's any questions. There's a couple more minutes. Are there any questions from anyone? Yes, Trevor?
Yeah, great talk. Thanks so much for sharing. I'm curious, does the Department of Ag have other soil scientists who are familiar with bear teams and help stand them up across the state?
We just hired our second soil scientist, and so she's not even on full time yet. I don't believe that she has any fire related experience, but I think Craig told them when I got hired that they had to allow me to do post fire work. So Craig's shaking his head. So I am, along with my many duties as a scientist, we all like to say, post-fire work is still in my pocket.
That request went straight to Director Sanderson. I made him shake my hand on it, so he's a man of his word. I'm going to hold him to it.
Good deal. Where are you based out of?
Yakima, but because of COVID, I'm still in North Douglas County.
Thanks so much. Good to meet you. Appreciate the talk.
Yeah. Anyone else? All right, Terry, you can send them on your break. I'll stick around for Catherine, so if there's any questions in the chat box, I'll answer them.
Perfect. Yeah, we're going to take about a 10-minute break. We're going to meet back at 3:40. We're going to hear from Catherine Rodden. I want to make sure that everybody's clear on the stuff in the chat. Your persona is not necessarily you, right? So I see a lot of entries that look like you're telling me what you already are. if that's what you want to play, fabulous. If I've misled you and not explained something clearly, you can play any role in the role-playing game. Okay, we are going to learn from each other in that experience. So we're not going to be losing anything by playing a part that you don't actually play in real life. Okay, so go ahead. I think most of you have put your roles in the chat. If you haven't done that yet, please do that during this next break, and we'll meet back at 3:40.
Terry, do you want me to put something in the chat, even though I'm going to be the room leader that you asked me to, or?
Nope, I'm gonna actually not have you do that because you're gonna be the kind of you'll be the scenario presenter rather than a role within the room. So yeah, you don't need to put something in the chat box right now.
Copy that. Just wanted to confirm. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. I appreciate you helping. Is Annie in the house? Nope, she must have gone on break. Hey, Craig.
Yo.
I'm seeing someone's hand up in the pile of folks at the bottom of the screen, but I can't seem to see who has their hand up.
It's Rodney.
Rodney?
Yeah.
Did you have a question, Rodney?
There, now his hand isn't up. I don't know.
We got her done. Okay, sweet.
What are you doing, Leavin? I need to go.
Okay, folks, if you've got your mics on, except for Catherine, you should probably have your mic off. Thank you very much. Okay, looks like everybody had a nice chance for a break, got a snack. I see some chewing going on, so that's awesome. All righty, we're going to be hearing from Catherine Rodden, our rock star weather lady. Take it away, Catherine.
Thanks, Terry. And since that was me who had my mic on earlier while you were talking, while somebody was clacking a smoothie stirring in the background, y'all feel free. So I'm gonna do the screen share here. Thanks, Greg. And hopefully it works. All right. Are you seeing my PowerPoint and the beginning slide, presentation mode?
Yes, we are.
Great. Okay. So I'm Catherine Rodden. I used to be in the Spokane forecast office as the service hydrologist, and a couple years ago I moved to our regional headquarters in Salt Lake City. So I'm now a hydrology program for our Western region in the Weather Service, but I still do bear stuff. And I'm just going to talk about the post-fire watershed hazard aspect that has been touched on and referenced. And Leslie definitely did a great job setting this up with her talk. So dealing with flooding a lot, there's riverine flooding. And by that, what I mean is, the rivers often come up relatively slowly, whether snowmelt or rain. They come out of bank. People are often standing by watching it happen, like that lower right picture. And I say typical in quotes because every flood's different and you can have catastrophic levee failures and, lots of stuff. But when we talk about post-fire events, it's a lot different. And I'll just show you an example. One of my favorite examples is the Eniat Valley before and after the 2015 Wolverine fire. And I'm actually mixing and matching a couple different fires, but all around Lake Chelan there. Drastically changed the landscape, and we've already heard from folks explaining, the difference that makes. It can change the soil. You lose the canopy that captures raindrops. You lose the ground cover that slows how the rain runs off. You have the rain picking up ash and things that it didn't before. So you get events that look more like this rather than a river kind of gently coming up and out of its banks. So on the left, there's a picture of a debris flow that's actually in California. On the right, it's a post-fire flash flood that happened in Colorado. So there's a mix, there's a spectrum of events. We can have, just increased flooding because of lack of ground cover to these really intense flash floods like you see on the right, very muddy and ashy and dark, and all the way to debris flows on the left that are a whole different animal than just a regular flood. And And even with the flash floods, these events can carry things that wouldn't normally be carried in a flood because the density of the flow changes with all the ash and sediment that it's carrying. So you'll see things coming down or that were deposited. It's really interesting if you ever have a chance to go walk somewhere where there's been a flash flood or debris flow after a fire, you will see some really big deposits that just kind of bend your mind in certain instances. So it's definitely a unique hazard. And I'll talk more about kind of the levels of hazard. It's not just that it's very impactful, but there's just many more pieces to it. So when you're out thinking about what might be a vulnerability in a post-fire environment from these hazards, one of the main things is alluvial fans. So this is a picture of the Wenatchee complex after the 2012 Wenatchee complex. So think of the alluvial fans being that place where all the canyons come out and flatten out. So in the case of Wenatchee, well, these canyons dump out really in the city of Wenatchee. So there was a huge concern after that fire because pretty much the entire community is on the alluvial fans of these canyons that burned. So that's a big example. Here's a small example. On the right is the topo map of this drainage with the blue line. And on the left is the satellite photo. So that's where the actual home is at the outlet of this stream. It's not even a stream, it's a dry wash. So this is a very individualized, very small example. And that's what the aerial photo looked like after the debris flow event. It destroyed a good chunk of his barn, deposited an unbelievable amount of boulders across the property. And I think he tried to save his house and then it got hit again in another event. And so when you're looking at places, our rivers in the Northwest tend to have plenty of capacity to carry a post-fire flow. We're really looking at these small canyons. And in this case, I say dry washes because this gentleman, his family had been there 100 years. And I went out, actually, this was Amy Hendershot with the NRCS. I think this was the day I maybe met her and went out and looked at this house. And that gentleman said that he had never even seen water in that dry wash in his lifetime, let alone his family being there for 100 years. And it happened to be sitting on an alluvial fan. All it took was a fire in the right rain event. So that's another thing to keep an eye out for. Dams, if there's dams in your area, definitely take a close look. 3 of 5 recreational dams failed in the Carlton Complex event. And this is a picture of them trying to do some repair. Yeah, really, really problematic and terribly dangerous from a flood warning standpoint. Dam failures, they just drastically increase the flow and the velocity, and it's really hard to get people out of the way in time. So that's a really big concern. And then just an example, there was another one in Chelan County, 8 Mile Lake. That dam was compromised, and then that watershed burned. So there was a big, like that time, I think the Winter Lakes in Benson Creek in Okanagan County in 2014, that really gave everybody the wake-up call. Not the first time people had thought about it. They're all considered eventually, but kind of this, we really have to be on top of this. And I'll touch more on that 8 Mile Lake Dam issue in a little bit. Culverts are a big pinch point. This is an 8-inch culvert along Lake Chelan, and that's what it looked like after, I think, the first creek fire. Super steep, severe burn. That 8-inch culvert was already undersized, probably put in like the 50s or something. So now there's no way that culvert is big enough. And that's when you start to get roads overtopped and washed out. And that's past a post-fire flow because those flows contain so much, debris, rocks, boulders, trees. They very frequently clog up. You can see at the top of the road structure how much debris came up over. And if I start having really poor network quality, let me know and I'll try to switch to a new internet connection. And the other issue with culverts is, especially in our neck of the woods in the Northwest, where all these steep terrains, these roads crisscross all these canyons. And so you can often have a lot of road fill, which means they, fill up the canyon to the height of the road, and then they put a culvert in. So if that culvert gets plugged, you fill that whole road base behind that road fill up with water before it overtops. So in essence, you now have a dam. So there's the added hazard of now you have these dams that can fail, and that almost happened in Okanagan County in one of the events. So culverts bring in a multitude of problems. And then when they do fail and overtop, the transportation infrastructure is really at risk. And it's not just the life safety issue, which is a huge issue. It's the number one way people lose their lives in floods is in cars. But also they carry utilities. It's the emergency access for first responders, especially in these rural areas. There aren't these great networks of highways everywhere. You can just take another route. So really keeping an eye on the transportation network and what that might bring. And again, because of these road networks crisscrossing a lot of these areas, you definitely could lose a lot of routes in these big events. Reservoirs is another one. This is a picture from California. Most of the pictures are from Washington, but a few aren't. This was a 2018 fire, and within 9 months, that reservoir filled in with sediment from behind where the person taking the picture is standing all the way out to where you see. And, it's hard to judge. What does that mean? Is that a lot? Well, according to the people that know that reservoir, that is an unbelievable amount of sediment. And some fires in California, they've seen as much as a 40% loss of capacity in the reservoir storage 1 year after a fire. So when you think about irrigators having access to water, not to mention dam safety at the outlet of the reservoir, water quality downstream, maybe it's, fish issue. What they saw in Oregon this last year, it was a huge drinking water quality issue, not just for reservoirs, but across the map. But so reservoirs introduce a lot of things to kind of be thinking about. And then any unique local issues. This is near and dear to my heart because I grew up in the Spokane Coeur d'Alene Basin. And these are pictures of the 1910 Big Burn, which, burned up a lot of the headwaters of that basin in Idaho. And it hasn't really burned since. It's been over 100 years. So it's one of those cases that it's going to burn someday. And since that fire, there is a ton of mining that was done. It's one of the largest Superfund sites in the country of all this mining waste that would then be vulnerable to a post-fire flash flood or debris flow that could remobilize stuff that they've spent billions of dollars trying to take care of. So that's a real unique one in my backyard where I grew up. So, if there's things in your area, I know there's a lot of mines scattered all over, maybe mining waste ponds, things like that, to just think of the area you're in and what might be at risk. And for folks on the west side, I gave this presentation a couple years ago, or one like it, and was looking at the 1902 fire in Southwest Washington. I think it's the Yakult. I don't know if I say that right ever, but until the Carlton Complex, that was the largest fire in state history. Although from what I read, if they combined it with other potential fires in the area as a complex, it could have been more like 1 million acres. So depends on how you estimate it. So that's what that area looked like after the burn. And that, that's not in dry eastern Washington. And that's pretty well known. Those dense, thick forests, when they do burn, it's high intensity. There's just a lot of vegetation to burn up. So this was a map I showed a couple years ago, and it only went through 2015. And you just see, these are the fire perimeters from 1980 to 2015. You just see this gap of fires all along western Washington and western Oregon. But those that have been watching the fires kind of creep in 2015 and 2017 over the Cascade Crest into the west were very aware that this could become a problem. And then in 2019, some news articles started to come out like, oh, this has been a problem in the past, in the early 1900s. Hundreds of thousands of acres burned in Southwest Washington and Western Oregon. And then, of course, this last year, that's exactly what happened in Western Oregon. That nice, wet, green, lush climate, they basically had the equivalent of 4 Carlton complexes just along the western slopes of the Cascades. Massive devastation, and also a lot of unknowns science-wise from this flash flood debris flow point of view, because we haven't had those kind of fires basically since the early 1900s. We don't have that data set of what causes a debris flow. I mean, these places have debris flows without fires. So what does the fire do, and what's the flash flood risk? And so a lot of issues they struggled with in Oregon, similar to what happened in Washington in 2014 and 15. And I just want to amend something I said yesterday when I said there wasn't like a local Craig Nelson to work with. They had some amazing local capacity and resources. Oftentimes it was through their watershed groups. And I didn't explain myself well, but what I meant was it wasn't well connected from the bottom to the top of the federal response. And that was really challenging. We had kind of the state private land bear team, but it was really hard to connect with what the locals were doing. So I just wanted to make sure folks don't think I'm disparaging Oregon, because they did some amazing and really creative work that hopefully will be spread. So to talk real quick, Leslie touched on this, the issue with the bear teams. They do an amazing job on federal and tribal lands, and they tell you what to watch out for, what's at risk downstream. They make a lot of maps, etc. It's the emergency response. But we do have that gap on the state and private lands. They do a lot of modeling, designing, and reporting. This is actually a picture of the bear den from the Carlton complex with a great big interagency team. There's feds, there's conservation districts, there's, well, I guess in this picture, that's about it. I bet there's probably another organization represented. And all the specialists that come together to, again, identify what could be at risk, what can be done to fix it, on and on and on. And one of the key products, in case you haven't seen it, I just want to give a shout out to the USGS for the debris flow hazard maps they make. And that is a product of the bear team's work, creating those soil burn severity maps like Leslie was talking about. All that hard work of being in the field and validating those soil burn severity. The USGS uses that to create these maps. And that's one from the big hollow fire in Washington this past summer. So other challenges, because it doesn't stop with just the hazard. The cause of these big events, this is as weathery as it's going to get today as far as the science, because I am not a meteorologist. So I found a great cartoon that helped me understand it. So this is precipitation in a winter event. So it's got the column of precip. It's very cold. It starts as an piece of ice. It maybe turns to snow. It might turn to water at the bottom and fall. So like a very cold precipitation event, it's very small, very light, because it starts as these small ice crystals, which, like a snowflake, they're very light. In a summertime event, which this cartoon shows, if that column of water in the air is warm, those water droplets can cycle. And as they do that, they grow in size. And so now in a summer thunderstorm, you can get water droplets that are almost a 1/4 inch big. And it is that impact from those large raindrops that really causes our biggest headaches in the post-fire environment. It picks up the ash, it picks up the sediment, it starts moving it, and then combined with a whole lot of other stuff. Anyways, that's one of the issues. And so we have this issue with rainfall intensity rather than amount. So we could have a day where it's in the wintertime and it might rain 2 inches and you might have some problems. But these events, the two right pictures are from the Carlton complex. That was only about a 1/2 inch in 60 minutes. That is a very average summer thunderstorm, and it caused devastation across Okanagan County. Some places it definitely rained a little more, and this is from the best estimate we can make in that area. So it does not take much of an intense rainfall to get things really moving. And it's not just that, though. This was a winter event in Okanagan County. I want to say 2015. This is Highway 153. And there's not much to see in this picture, except if you look at those tiny little culverts, those are actually brand new culverts because the stream channel filled in, I think, 8 feet, maybe 13. I don't remember, just from the sediment that came down. So we didn't have a big debris flow necessarily or a big flash flood, but just that it was a fairly heavy rain event. There was snow melt. And it still caused a lot of damage because it just plugged up the culverts. They couldn't take it, and they had to put new overflow culverts in. So a little different hazard, but it can still be destructive. So on the detection side, and I think Craig touched on this yesterday, this image on the right is radar coverage from the surrounding radars. So from the right, you've got Spokane from the right. From the east, you have Spokane. From the west, you have Seattle. From the south, it's from Pendleton. And those are polygons of, I think it's the good radar coverage. I can't remember exactly. It's been a while. And right in the middle, you see a lot of those mega fires from 2014 and 2015 across Chelan, Okanagan counties, where they're not covered by those polygons. So it's not to say we can't see anything on the radar. It's just at that point the radar is hitting so far above the ground that we're not exactly sure what's happening on the ground. Are those raindrops evaporating before they hit the ground? Is it raining heavier from lower in the cloud? So a lot of uncertainty. So getting rain gauges out there can be really critical. And because of that rainfall intensity issue, it can be as little as 5 minutes that causes a problem. We really need rapid reporting rain gauges. And that picture on the left, I think, is one that Department of Ecology put out in Okanagan County somewhere. And I'll just say one more thing, that all these pins on the map are emergency rain gauges in Washington as of probably 2015 or 16. Washington is very, very lucky. From what I've seen across the West, besides California, maybe another state, a lot of folks don't have this option. Like, nobody's coming to the table with a lot of rain gauges. And I give a lot of credit to Okanagan Conservation District and Craig for really helping, push that issue that this was a critical need for life safety up there after the Carlton complex in 2015. Land ownership is another one. Leslie mentioned it, and I already mentioned it. The bear teams, federal teams don't cover everywhere. So this is a map of the 2015 and 2014 fires, but I'm going to focus on 2015. Just the patchwork land ownership. You've got federal, state, tribal lands, private lands. And so in 2015, you had the state and private land team cover those parts of those fires. You had the Colville tribe team supported by Department of Interior that covered those parts of those fires. You had one Forest Service team doing a tiny little corner up there and another doing portions of those fires. And this is just for Okanagan County. So you talk about a county that's been hammered with mega fires. Their resources are strapped. They have the benefit of having these post-fire assessments, but they've got 4 different teams with 4 different reports with 4 different formats and data sets. And I mean, that to me is just like, someday there's got to be a better way. And this was lucky, they actually had everything get assessed, but it still didn't, in my mind, come together as much as it should for those local people that have to go forward with this information and do something with it. It's just a lot. So all of that with the bear teams and all the assessments, one of the things we've seen over and over again is that the floods can come before the bear team is done, and sometimes before the fire's out. And my favorite picture to illustrate that is fire camp being flooded at the Carlton complex. That was the big event. And it didn't wash away fire camp or cover it with the debris flow, but this flooded because of the devastation that was going on all across the fire. That put an end to that fire and also caused devastation. 2019, the William Flats fire, on the 9th, they were fighting the fire. And on the 10th, they were trying to helicopter out firefighters that had gotten stranded overnight because of the flash floods. So, it happens in a moment with a tiny thunderstorm can do this kind of work. And Annie Schmidt, she's in Chelan County. I don't know if she's on today. She was on yesterday. We were giving a talk to IMTs about this, fire flood. It can be there before you're done. And she said this quote, and I love it. I've used it for years. Even in the most prepared communities with great resources, we are behind on life safety the moment the fire starts. And these pictures are all pictures from Chelan and Okanagan County of events that happened that put the fires out. I mean, there was no time to get rain gauges out, to do great emergency plans, to, do big assessments. Homes were destroyed, highways were destroyed, loss of life miraculously did not happen in any of these. It's really mind-blowing when you hear the stories of how people escaped with their lives, just like you hear those in Wildfire. It's like, how did no more people die? So this really just can come right on the top of the fire emergency. I already talked about dam safety, but that Carlton complex event, those dams failed, and that was before the bear assessment, I think, had been done in that basin. So the point of that is to start thinking about the response and those post-fire risks before the fire, ideally, but at least before the fire's out. And I think the first time I met Terry, and I met Craig and Leslie, is going out on the Carlton complex with the NRCS before the fire was out, before the floods came. So even though we didn't have those pieces in place, we stood below those dams looking at the homes below and kind of talked to some homeowners, and we were talking to other folks. So that's the ideal way. Even if you're doing a windshield survey, get out there. And it's not going to be the people that you would typically depend on because they're busy with the wildfire suppression response. So, that's, in my experience, why the conservation districts have been so critical in this is filling that gap. And just, to me, the most famous example is the Thomas Fire in California. The picture on the left is December 2017. And a couple weeks later, they had that debris flow that killed over 20 people. So it can definitely be fatal. So public awareness is another challenge. I already showed all those events that happened before the fire's out. So it's hard to get the public aware of this risk if they haven't personally experienced it, especially if it could come before the fire's out. Even if you do explain it to them, they often don't believe you. A lot of these folks are insured for fire, but not for floods. And this one picture in the lower right actually turned away an NRCS offer of a berm or levee because they just didn't believe them. So it's really challenging to let the public know that they might be in harm's way if they haven't experienced that before. And I was giving a talk several years ago, a similar topic, and a gentleman said at the end, he's like, "Why are you talking about this? In California, we all know this is an issue. Don't you guys know?" I was like, "Well, no, it's fairly new. We have more people here coming in over the years. We're having some big fires. It's not deep in our, DNA of this area of what to look out for, like it maybe is in Southern California." And then I was researching some stuff in Montecito. It's like, okay, Montecito, not everybody evacuated. And thank goodness as many people did, or there would have been far more fatalities, but there were a lot of people that didn't evacuate. And they had post-fire debris flows and flash floods in the 1960s, in the 1990s, which I don't have a picture of. So not only are they in Southern California, where this is part of the discussion all the time, but in this very community, they had experienced it as recently as the 1990s. And even that wasn't enough for them to get up and evacuate and understand that risk. So if I ever run into that gentleman again, we're going to have a conversation, because just knowing it's a problem does not fix our social science outreach risk messaging issue that we have. And one of the things that I feel is kind of a hindrance to this is a lot of people, when we talk about flooding, we're often talking about FEMA flood maps. That's one of the conversations most like, oh, I have to buy flood insurance. Where's the map? Where am I in relation to that map? Well, I already mentioned rivers are not our big concern. A dry wash is not going to have a FEMA flood map, most likely. And this was an event in Chelan County, and I was giving a talk, and an engineer in the room happened to do the design to replace the county bridge here after this event. That's fortuitous. And so he had run the calculations, and he said at this spot, the 100-year flood was 300 cubic feet per second, and he estimated the flow at 4,000 cubic feet per second. So that's an order of magnitude above the 100-year flood, and it was an afternoon summer thunderstorm. I don't even know that this was in a map floodplain anyways, but even if it was a map floodplain, that does not describe the risk. And it's a disservice to try to talk to people about post-fire risk by even mentioning flood maps, because we're beyond flood maps. And a lot of these events take place where people haven't flooded before, especially if we're talking about debris flows. They can change direction. They hit something, they take a 90-degree turn, they jump out of banks. So they're very unpredictable. So I actually was on a kind of a geohazards landslide debris flow call, not related to post-fire. And some colleagues in Alaska were saying, we tried to use flash flood warnings for debris flows, but people ignore them because they know they're not by a stream that floods. Well, but they're below a canyon that's spitting out a debris flow. So the messaging between, these hazards that are much more unpredictable and happen where we don't typically have flooding is an area we need to figure out and do better in. And another challenge, so let's say you did the best you can on the public messaging, everybody gets it, But then what about the vacationers that come in after that? And that was a big concern. This is a picture of Lake Chelan after the 2015 First Creek fire. I know that fire perimeter is really light, but it burned up those steep slopes along the lake. And that dark black line is the one road that's in and out. And you have a lot of nice homes down there. A lot of them are the vacation rental, VRBO or Airbnb. So even if we did a perfect job reaching all those people, which I know we don't, you really never can. How do we reach those people that are coming from Arkansas to spend a weekend on the lake, with family that's joining them from Florida? We never hit upon a perfect thing. We came up with ideas like maybe let's have door hangers that's, like the hotel thing on the back of the door that says, here's your emergency exit, or, road signs are basic, but that's a real challenging one because you can't reach the people that are, we call them transient, just visiting for the day. So that includes hikers, it includes just people out for a drive, etc. And in another one, a different hazard in 2017, I can't remember the name of the fire. Trevor might remember. It was above Safety Harbor on Lake Chelan, and it increased the potential debris flow risk there. I think there was evidence of past debris flows. And it's called Safety Harbor because that's where boats go in the storm. It's Safety Harbor. Well, if we have a thunderstorm, that place could spit out a debris flow right to where the boats are. And so that was another struggle. I mean, I think the Forest Service closed the toilet there and maybe put up some signage, but, and then that's pictures of First Creek in case you want to see above Lake Chelan. This last summer, that exact scenario happened in Arizona where they had a fire. There was a boater on the lake right at an outlet, and the first storm, I think, that hit the fire spit out a flash flood debris flow, capsized the boat, and 2 people died. So it was theoretical when we were dealing with Lake Chelan in 2017, and then to see it actually happen is just heartbreaking, and it is so challenging. Now, how do you reach boaters that, so there's many levels of things to think through. And I acknowledge that a lot of this is on the emergency management planning side, but again, those folks don't really have the capacity to carry this during the wildfire suppression. And you're spinning up real fast and working with the bear teams and also just trying to help your community get the word out, even if you're not helping with that emergency planning side of things. So on the mitigation treatment side, I know that you're going to be hearing from folks that'll be talking about the emergency watershed protection program, and that's where you might get a levee around a house and other stuff. So I'm not going to touch on that, also because that's just not my field. But I will talk about the other mitigation measures, and I know Craig's going to be talking about this tomorrow, I think, but outreach and education is the best thing you can do. I think I probably made that point. It's really the most important thing. And we focus on that a lot at the Weather Service because we can issue warnings all day long, but if people don't understand that it applies to them or know what to do with it, I mean, it doesn't matter what we do. So making folks understand who's at risk. And that's really where the NRCS and conservation districts are so key. Going door to door, working with individuals on their specific site is just such a critical service. And the picture on the left, just so you know, is a fire meeting. The picture on the right is a Okanagan Conservation District hosted workshop after the Carlton Complex. And I want you to notice the difference in attendance. And so as a Weather Service person who knows the fire might be coming tomorrow, I want to get to those fire meetings. And we did do that in 2014 and 2015. We actually had kind of a schedule that we rotated to try to hit all these meetings because it wasn't just Okanagan County, it was Chelan and Ferry and other counties. Because you reach more people in those fire meetings and people are often exhausted and they don't want to come out for another meeting after the fire. But kudos to Okanagan Conservation District for all the work you did to get people to come out after the fire and continue that engagement. So another mitigation effort, because you can't, I don't have a slide to demonstrate this, but you can't really fix the problem. You can't stop debris flows from happening. You can't stop flash floods. You can mitigate some of it, like with what you'll hear from NRCS and from Bob. But one of the biggest things is emergency planning. I mentioned the 8 Mile Lake Dam in 2017 in Chelan County. It was an old dam. It was already kind of not up to par. And then the watershed burned up. And so we had this, and it would flood a number of neighborhoods down by Leavenworth, not Leavenworth proper, but there were a lot of people that were potentially at risk if this dam failed. And this dam is in the wilderness. It didn't have stream gauges. It didn't have rain gauges. So we had to do a lot of work to figure out how on earth we would monitor and warn, how we would avoid sending out false warnings just based on a bad gauge report, which is that upper right picture is a screenshot of the camera that they installed that had nighttime infrared, however they did that, I don't know. So again, it's like your emergency planning is to warn people. It's not to fix the problem or remove the danger to them. It's to help make sure that we can hopefully get word to them so they can take action to stay safe. Rain gauge considerations, I already mentioned the kind of the radar issues, and I mentioned this here because when you're talking about the mitigation, it's not easy to get a rain gauge or to place it. So there's a lot of legwork that has to be done. There might be permitting issues, and the Forest Service Bear program has been really great over a number of years now of trying to wrap that permitting process into their bear work so that they're laying the groundwork, they're trying to make it as easy as possible. The non-ground disturbing setup you see helps that. Sometimes if people have personal relationships with the incident management team or response, they might get them to leave a rain gauge behind. I've never seen that happen, but I've heard that happens. But this is another place conservation districts and locals can easily be involved in. I mean, Okanagan Conservation District helped find sites for all the gauges that Washington State provided and placed. So I think some of those went on private property. I don't fully remember, but that was critical to helping get these out on the landscape. And this is just a fun little story about culverts when you talk about mitigation and culverts being such a problem. My background is civil engineering, and I can tell you every civil engineer is taught you build a bigger culvert, right? So these are below a fire in the southwest, 2 little culverts. So they said, we'll put big giant culverts. So those little culverts got upsized to 84-inch culverts. And the reason you see that one tipped up in the middle is because after the very first rain event, it failed one of those culverts. And while the engineers were out there looking at that, the next rain event failed another culvert. And their final solution was to pull all the culverts out and make a drivable dip. So imagine the amount of money they spent on that engineering design, materials, construction. Again, culverts can be very problematic, and a solution that has worked very well, I've seen it implemented in Chelan County, is just great inlets. It can, help keep the bigger debris out. They still can get plugged with sediment, but you can come after the storm and scrape the debris off and get the culvert cleaned out and save the culvert potentially. So you have to think about mitigation in different ways than you're used to. And then, back to that public awareness, signage. A majority of flood fatalities happen in cars, and that's not really for post-fire reasons. It's just people tend to drive across flooded areas when they shouldn't. But particularly in the post-fire environment, those roadways are one of the places people are in most danger. And if you want to warn visitors, vacationers, that highway or county road where they're entering that area might be the only indication they get that there's some kind of hazard they're not familiar with. So we always try to get those out. And the way the feds often deal with these road hazards is they just close a road because they can. Well, you can't do that with a county road, with a highway. So it's just an existing hazard, and that might be the best mitigation you have. And this is actually my last slide, so we'll have plenty of time for discussion or let people go early. But, so as you might have noticed, I don't have a lot of mitigation because really it's about public awareness. People just have to know how hazardous it is, that we can't fix the landscape. And the way we do that for a lot of us that work in post-fire is when we talk about fire, remember to talk about floods, because that's the way we raise public awareness. That's the way elected officials learn more about it, decision makers, policymakers, everybody. And I think we're starting to do a better job of that. But I went to school for engineering, and I did water stuff, and I'd never heard about a post-fire flood until 2010 when I can't even remember the name of the fire now, when that spit out over the highway into the Columbia River. We just don't talk about it very much. And that is changing, but it's just a a plea to everybody. Anytime you're talking about fire, tack on the whole cycle. And flooding is a part of the cycle. I mean, that's how we, some of these stream basins regenerate the woody debris for fish habitat and whatnot. Is, it's all part of the cycle. And I can tell you, folks in Oregon, the fish biologists were actually really excited about the potential for new woody debris to come off those burn scars in Western Oregon, because those haven't burned in ages. And they were, people have been pulling wood out of those streams and rivers for decades and decades. And, they were almost gleeful, but, you can't really say that. But a lot of those fish biologists were saying this is kind of a once in a lifetime opportunity to bring that material back in at a scale that it needs to be. So it's not all about the hazards. There is regenerative benefits from some of this, but that is all I have. And I'll take questions, or you can move on to discussion, Terry, whatever you want.
Yeah, I think we'll just open up for some questions. Looks like we've got some folks here, and very great opportunity to ask Catherine or Leslie, if you'd like to ask Leslie questions too. I think she's still around as well. Just raise your hand on the little bar, or just jump on and ask it.
Yep, and I'm still here.
Anyone? Anyone? Bueller?
So I was just wanted to respond to Emily's comment from DNR. The debris flow modeling and soil burn severities show problem areas, but not where material will go, and that's absolutely the case. And I can tell you, in the Weather Service, we actually there's a few partners that are working on actual inundation models for debris flows. Hopefully that leads to something, but her point being that you can map alluvial fans to show where those hazards are, and I totally agree. I know in Oregon they've done a lot of work with that, and they were working on that in this past fire season, connecting the debris flow potential maps from where it would come from with the historically mapped alluvial fans to suggest, well, this is a high hazard basin, and this is where we have a fan that suggests this is the area of hazard. So thank you for that, Emily. And if you want to unmic and say more, clearly more your area of expertise than mine.
Yeah, thank you for commenting on that. Trevor and I are on the landslide mapping team with the WGS, and I'm super new to the team, but we've been mapping alluvial fans, but it's really what you talk about is knowing that they're there, and being aware of this problem isn't enough. We have to communicate that to landowners. And so I posted a link in the chat to a recent pamphlet we made to hand out to homeowners that has information about alluvial fans. So that is a good resource. I'm not sure how we can maybe go door to door and get that out there, but it's a good, I really like the publications team did a good job with that. So thought I'd plug, shameless plug.
Thanks. And I just saw that earlier up in the chat.
Emily, that's a really cool tool. Some of us, Catherine and I, and some others are on a post-wildfire flood committee. Well, Trevor is part of that too, and we can see about they've got a website, afterthefirewah.org, I think, that might be able to get that resource put up there and make it available for communities that are being affected by fire, to be able to get that out. And similar to what we did, with Carlton and others, just getting that in the hands of emergency management, because like in 14, they had National Guardsmen that were going out and they were going door to door delivering water and checking on people and things like that. We were handing them flyers, watch out for flooding, watch out for this, watch out for that. And this could be one that we could also be handing out to get out to people to let them know. But it'd be good to be able to get this out to people beforehand. I would like to see this in the hands of contractors before they say, yeah, put your house right here, right? Yeah, okay, all right. Because that's something that, they'll build the house where the landowner wants, but it'd be nice to know if they could actually kind of communicate what those risks are to people. I think some will, some won't, but some will. So.
So Craig, can we pull that out of the chat and put it in the resources file?
I will do that.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah.
Great.
The other thing, real quick, I know that Mike Baden's got his hand up and he wants to talk. I was speaking of the rain gauges. I was just introduced to a new potential system that I think might be less expensive than the rain gauges that we even put out. It's by a company based in Snoqualmie, right by where Bobby Lindemulder lives, and it's called Tolt Hawk. ToltHawk.com. I'll put a link to their website in the chat. But they use it's actually it's a different sensor that sits above the channel, and when it sees a spike, it immediately sends out the notifications to wherever you want to send it, and it works either cellularly or satellite. And the cellular is like $500 for the unit, and it works for like 3 years or something. So that's considerably less than the $23,000 I think that USGS quoted for a rain gauge. So we can put a lot more of those little bad boys out than the rain gauges. It has to be cellular, but there's a satellite option. I think it's like $1,500 or something. So it's still cheaper than the 23,000. So anyways, I'll put that in there and let you kind of run with it, Terry.
Thank you. Okay, Mike.
Hey there, thanks. And if this is going to be talked about at another time or later, yeah, please, we can certainly wait. And Craig talked about it a little bit, but Catherine did as well. Maybe talk a little bit more about the meetings that you guys put together. You know, you talked about the fire meeting and then the workshop afterwards, things like that. You know, are there, you know, as people think about how they engage after a fire, you know, are there thresholds or settings where those meetings might be more valuable than others, you know, into a certain type of fire or whatever it might be, a threshold where those are more useful than others? Or, you know, what kind of topics do you guys think are important during those? And I know it may vary from fire to fire, but what are some of those things that go into the thought process as you're thinking about putting together a meeting?
So real quick, I will say that if you want to reach the public, you got to go to the fire meetings. Like Catherine's photos that she showed side by side, I think really kind of tell the story. You know, we go to the fire camp meetings that they hold for the public, and you know, when it's a major fire, they're holding them probably every 3 or 4 days, maybe once a week, that type of thing. Just depends on what's been going on. If you can get 5 minutes there, it's worth its weight in gold, because you have the media there, you have, you know, the local citizens are there, you have elected officials are there, others that are going to continue to help spread that word. So that's, it really depends on the audience. If you're wanting to talk to the public and get mass communication out, that to me is the absolute ideal. If you want to talk about kind of coordinating efforts of multiple entities and things like that, I think you just sit down and you start identifying who are all the players in this community, you know, that we can bring and get into a meeting space and start having those conversations. That one's just a little bit more of a intellectual process, I think, as far as identifying those entities that are going to have, you know, some resources or some input and some guidance and things like that. You know, that's kind of how we did it in 14 and 15, and you know, it's just kind of maintained that way. And in fact, to this day, I still have communications with some of those groups about fire preparedness stuff. And I don't talk to them hardly at all outside of that for anything else, you know. But when it comes to fire preparedness or recovery, you know, then we just immediately fire everything back up, and we're right back where we were, you know.
So I'd like to add on to that. I wish Annie was on this call, because she's really, to me, one of the people that has made that happen. So going back to 2013, I think, Annie, she not only is she a national resource for post-fire recovery in the big sense, but she's a local PIO within her fire district in Chelan County and has a history with that. And so in 2013, she knew the incident, and I was trying to get out there and message. I was like, I just need like 2 minutes just to stand up and say, you could be at risk for flooding, just know that. And all she could get, or maybe it was before I met Annie. Anyways, at that first meeting I did that, all they would agree to was to let me stand in the back, and at the end of the meeting, they said, and by the way, there's a woman from the Weather Service there who's here to talk to you about flood. If you want to, go talk to her. Like, I don't even think I was allowed to speak. And so getting to know Annie and through her connections, like, it just was a game changer. So by 2014, with Annie in the loop, we were able to get on the agendas because she knows the PIO networks. And not only standing up in meetings, but if you can get tied in to the PIOs on the fire and you say, hey, we've got all this like ag recovery information. If you're having a slow news day, put it on your website or, put it on Facebook because they've got social media going. They're doing statements. And Annie's done some trainings of national PIO incident groups and created a toolkit even of post-fire messages. So there's a lot of leverage there, but you have to get permission to come to their meeting. You can't just show up and say, I want to talk. Maybe if you're Craig, you can strong arm them anyways, but it's not a culture where they like to just be walked over. They have a mission, and that's to put the fire out, and you have to respect that too. So.
Awesome. Yeah, one of the things that I feel like was key, and Leslie pointed this out. Craig's just such a good example of this, and we've talked about it before about making those relationships with your community partners way ahead of time, and being part of your community. I mean, not just going in and doing your job, but actually being part of the community. I know that each of us that in the conservation district were involved in different organizations that were helping, and in various different ways. And it's those alternate connections that we can also bring in and coordinate in a way that helps. But I was just also pondering the idea that we sort of have to make these on this ongoing basis. If we lose a Craig Nelson, for example, we have to reestablish all those relationships again. And I know that I was not working in that realm of outreach and education very much. I was doing a lot of presentations at them, but I wasn't involved in organizing them. And I know that there are multiple different organizations, nonprofits, government agencies, and things that are all trying to communicate the same thing. But that 30,000-foot communication and connection vision has to happen as well, because that's what's going to bring some continuity to these conversations. And you don't just lose a personality and lose all those connections. Does that make sense? That it would be worthwhile for us to push in that direction of becoming more connected from all those levels. That's why I really appreciate Catherine. Thank you so much. And Leslie and all the presenters, actually, because they've all been involved with multiple layers of this. I often thought during the fires that I was in a very unique position as a planner, that I could see what was happening on the ground level. But then I was also having this connection with reports, with data that I was sending to the state legislature through Craig, that I had this kind of unique vantage point from which to view the different things that were happening, right? I had that down on the ground, individual knowledge of stuff on one person's property, but I also had that data from the larger picture. I had the GIS maps, I had the data collected, I had the Bear Team reports, I had all those higher level things that someone down on the ground couldn't go and talk to the state legislature about, that we can be sort of a bridge between those different layers, those different scales of organization. And that, to me, there's a great amount of potential. I think that's what Catherine's been talking about. I'm going to come back to you, Catherine. We've got someone else was waiting in line, and I've lost their name now. I'm sorry. I apologize. I'm sorry. Catherine, Sharon.
Sharon Frazee.
Yep. Sharon, would you go ahead?
Hi, thanks. So I work for a nonprofit, and just always trying to find ways to be prepared for when this might happen. I'm in South Central Washington. But I guess one of my questions is, I want to be prepared. So I want to create some kind of a toolkit or a resource guide for when this happens, so we have this plan put together so we can just open it up and have at it. But I am wondering if you could just mention some of who the biggest partners would be.
That's an excellent question. That's an excellent question. It's a long list.
Well, right. Yeah, I guess that's the other thing. And maybe you could just maybe put that in the chat box or something.
I think Catherine has a really good point, and that Craig has a really good point. The fire districts are huge. Any of the fire response, there's a lot of fire response organizations. Craig, you might, I've been out of the loop for a while and I don't know who currently is doing that, but maybe Mike and Craig could jump in and tell me who the current folks are. I know that there's WAFAC and
definitely want to talk to WAFAC, the Washington Fire Adaptive Communities Learning Network, and they can help you get connected to others. Really, it's from our standpoint, we reached out to organizations that we have worked with or that we knew existed, and in 2014 we just basically did a general call out, come one, come all, and I think there was like 70 people in the room. But I mean, we have a lot of nonprofits that do natural resource work in our area. And each one seemed to bring like 3 people. So there was realistically probably about 30 organizations maybe there. And it ranged from federal agencies to tribes to state agencies, local government, you name it. And then of course, a handful of these, more than a handful, probably a dozen plus nonprofits. And it really, we just kind of developed that from who was there. So in the state of Washington, I'm assuming this is still the case. Mike might know for sure, but if it is a fire, believe it or not, the coordinating there's and I'll talk about this some tomorrow. The coordinating council is started, and the chair of that is actually the State Department of Ag, which kind of makes you go, wait a minute. Why is Ag in charge of fire when DNR is the one in charge? Well, the reason is because DNR is busy putting the fire out. So they don't have the time, and all the time that I spent talking to folks on that coordinating council, I don't know that DNR was even on the call. It's not that they're not interested; they're just busy, obviously so. But when it comes to how do they bring resources and everything together, all these state agencies get together and they start having these I think they were weekly phone calls, conference calls. And there was Ag, there was Department of Ecology, there was Fish and Wildlife, there was the Conservation Commission, there was State Patrol, there was Department of Transportation, you name it, anybody and everybody in the alphabet soup of state government had somebody on those calls. And then there was little old me that somehow got invited to those calls because I just threw adult temper tantrums at the time. Not really, but that's what I call them. And that's how I got invited to them. But that was where we actually came up with the rain gauge solution that Catherine was showing. Because you throw out the problem and then all these minds all get to working on it. So that's the really high level stuff where some of that stuff was going on. And it was somebody from the Department of Ecology that said, well, we've got a bunch of these stream gauges that are sitting on the shelf that we took out in 2008 because of budget cuts, and they're just collecting dust. I think we can just change the sensor, put them out there, and they'll work. Lo and behold, that was pretty much it. There was a little bit of coding that had to be done, but they were put out for a fraction of the cost of what was originally estimated. And that's where, you start to have those conversations with folks. But in order to get there, you have to have essentially somebody that's going to sponsor you. So I got in because the Conservation Commission got me into those calls because I was the one on the ground seeing what was going on. I had people that were bringing me information like what Terry was talking about. It's a massive data dump and it's got to go through a filter. It didn't have to be me. It could have been somebody from the county. It could have been somebody from another organization. We just stepped up willing to serve that role, and everybody went, okay, you do it. And so, that's really oftentimes in emergencies, it's who's willing to step up to that role and do it. But you got to, like I said yesterday, you've got to be willing to step up and keep going. And the downside to this now is that now people keep coming and saying, well, Craig and your team, you guys are all experts. I don't want to be an expert on this. I hate this. I don't want to do it. I'm tired of it. But I also understand that I have something that I can train others in. So you all get to be experts now, and so you guys can do it. So, yeah, I'll shut up now.
So I don't shut up, Craig. Never shut up. So Sharon, I would say too that there's a lot of guides being developed exactly for what you're talking about. Like, who do you talk to? What do you do? Washington has one through the flood risk mitigation group called Silver Jackets. There's a couple of different entities that are working on them from national level. And I think the link that Mike Baden chatted, the After the Fire WA has that. I don't know what they're calling it, but I also want to mention, I forgot to mention in my presentation, but the Wildland Fire Leadership Council and Western Governors Association has acknowledged this post-fire problem is a problem that communities need support with. And so they're trying to figure out how to get assessments done on state and private lands. They're trying to figure out a roadmap for communities that is really holistic and includes all of the resources. And one of the things they're ready to test is a community navigator. Like, can we take a Craig and put him in Western Oregon where they've never dealt with this before and hold their hands? And actually, we were hoping to get Craig to do that in Western Oregon last year, but it's just a concept and it wasn't able to happen. So just be aware that there are people that have influence and policy and, can actually make things happen at that level, really taking a look at this. So I just want to throw that in there. And I also want to give a shout out to Kelsey Madsen, who's on this. She is from FEMA. She got thrown into Western Oregon emergency on that state private land team, never having done post-fire. And I think it's probably 6 months now, and I'm sure it's still her life, but she has done a fantastic job working to knit together the federal and the state and private land team assessments. And the state of Oregon has been super proactive in trying to prioritize projects across the state. I mean, they had, numerous mega fires that they've never really had to grapple with at that scale. And so that slide I showed of an Okanagan County trying to piece together all these different teams' reports, like the state and Oregon really stepped in to help do that. And I would just say going forward, if you need an expert on what can fund what in post-fire, call Kelsey. Probably like Craig, she's like, no, I don't ever want to think about this again. But I don't know anybody in the country right now that probably has more experience than her of what pot of money can pay for what in a post-fire environment. So
thanks. I appreciate hearing that. I actually just moved off of the wildfire week before last, so wrapped that up. But yeah, we did create a number of different resources for that funding piece, and most recently created a kind of survey style function online where someone can go and put in exactly what your parameters for the funding that you are looking for, and it would put out which funding sources would be most likely to match your needs. So it was a pretty interesting project to work on.
Oh, thank you guys so much. Yeah, that's great. Did that answer your question sufficiently, Sharon? Awesome. Cool.
Real quick, I do want to add too is that whenever you see these resource guides, if it's more than 6 months old, you need to contact each of those entities and find out if they're still in the game, or if what it says there is still true. Even federal programs, as slow as the federal government can be to move, sometimes their program rules will change. Recovery funding can come and go in the blink of an eye. And there's always, it's always, I would always recommend that you find somebody that knows a lot about that program and track them down and find out what the intricacies are. One of the programs that will be talked about tomorrow, the Emergency Watershed Protection Program, it sounds like, yeah, the money's there, it's ready to go. That's not necessarily the case. There's kind of two sides to EWP, and one side kind of always has money, but rarely does it ever get used because it's only for exceptional circumstances, which post-fire flood risks is almost never one of those reasons, unless you're trying to protect like a hospital or something. But the other side takes congressional appropriation. It can take 6 months. It can take a year to get money into those pots. So just kind of understanding the little nuances of each of those programs, and even we've seen, and we've ourselves have produced community resource guides. From 14 to 15, we had a guide we used in 14. Before we put it out in 15, we called everybody up and said, "Do you still want to be in this?" because we're going to make your phone ring off the hook. Are you sure you so? And we had a couple of them that are like, I think we'll step away this time, and it's like, okay, that's fair, so there's things like that you want to check, and so, I've had people that have asked me for those guides. I'm like, yeah, you can have it, but I won't guarantee that the information's updated because we haven't updated it recently. So that's another thing to keep an eye on.
Yeah, we're going to talk quite a bit tomorrow, more on the individual conservation district level. But those lessons, I think, are really applicable across the board and at different scales and at different levels of government and organizations. We're going to talk quite a bit about how to organize the work, how to plan out what you're doing, what kinds of things to consider as far as actually doing the work. So we've been talking the last couple of days about fire and what happens and what it looks like and what the results are. Now we're going to talk tomorrow quite a bit about how to implement all the things, right? How to do the things. We've gone out, we've looked at the things, now what? Now what do we do? And that's going to come in handy because those kinds of thinking, what we're hoping is that we're teaching you sort of a way of thinking. And Leslie put it so well. She said, don't reinvent the wheel, but think out of the box. Share resources with other people, but also you kind of have to get into this creative frame of mind where it's not a normal situation. So you've got to be looking at abnormal kinds of ways to do things, right? And we'll talk quite a bit more, like I say, about that tomorrow. Thank you guys. Are there any other questions? We've got a little bit of time left. We could field a couple more questions. Anyone? Go ahead, Catherine.
Just a quick comment about the gauge. You mentioned the toll. I saw some folks chatting. Just be sure you talk to your Weather Service office. I know actually the Spokane office is investigating that right now. We have to make sure it gets into our system to be good for warning. And there are some on the market that are harder than others. But I'm not saying that that's a bad gauge, but just be aware of that. And I know there was a question about what fires to watch out for in 2021. Talk to your Weather Service office. I'm not dialed in enough in Washington to know, so just wanted to answer that one too.
That's an easy answer. All of them, Catherine. All of them. A to Z.
Yeah, I actually really believe, and I'll talk about this a little bit tomorrow, but I really believe in that saying, prepare for the worst and hope for the best. And we ought to be preparing all the time. And I told Craig frequently while we were doing all this work, I wish that the state had a pot of money that they just put aside for this kind of stuff, because we know it's going to happen. We know something's going to happen. We don't know exactly what or exactly where, but there's got to be some resources set aside for it, right? And we need to be thinking about that in all those realms, not just financial, but staff-wise and, skill-wise and training-wise and resource-wise, building those connections out. And I hope that you're getting that sense, really, that the key to this is doing stuff ahead of time and not just waiting to the last minute, because that will really slow you down. You can do it. I mean, we did it, but it'll really slow you down if you don't have those established relationships, those established ways of doing something. It's totally cool to, get creative and think about stuff before it happens. And I always, I was thinking about Leslie and Catherine and about, the downhill flood potential. And there were lots of very high level bear team assessments and all that kind of thing. But if I looked at a topo map after a while, I could look at that topo map and say, here's a large area of stuff that's been burned pretty heavily, and it's got this much area to collect volume of water. And it's going to come down to this point just by looking at the topo map. And there are ways that you can train yourself to look for those opportunities to kind of get it under your skin and learn about it and get good at it before it happens. And that will be very helpful to you guys in the long run. Trevor, did you have another question?
Nope, my question was answered by Catherine, but yeah.
Okay.
Alluvial fans is my drum I'm beating these days. You can look at the basin and see where the material might be. But the geologic past is a great record for what has happened, whether it was by fire or just freak storm events or whatever. The deposits are on the ground if you look for them.
Yeah, GIS maps, guys. Look at maps a lot. They'll help you a lot. We'll talk more about that later too, and how to manage some of that. Anyone else? Well, thank you so much, everybody, for this awesome discussion. I've really appreciated it. I learned a lot actually from today that I didn't know, even though I was working kind of in a different realm, and so I really appreciate all the input. Craig, you have something to say? Well,
I'm going to change the setting here see if we can see more people. So I'm just warning you all before we do this. It may kind of do something really funky. I don't know. Supposedly this is supposed to make it to where we can see more people. So I discovered this setting. So maybe for tomorrow we can see more people. That would be nice. So it's almost as good as having a real in-person meeting, but I'll take what I can get. I think the only ones that doesn't show are the ones that don't have their video on, so that's okay. So, I mean, I've been waiting all day to see Guy, and he finally popped up on my screen now. So, yeah.
I think Guy was having some trouble with his internet.
Had a lot of challenges today with Teams. Let me tell you, I'm bouncing back and forth through several computers trying to get things to work.
Well, it's good to have you here. So. That's all I have, Terry. I thank everybody for joining in today, and look forward to the conversation tomorrow.
Thank you. And Guy, we are recording this for later consumption, so we will definitely get the recording to you so that you don't miss anything from all the technical difficulties. Thank you, guys, and we will see you tomorrow.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you, everyone.